In a recent article by Catherine Pearson at the New York Times, older Americans open their hearts to readers about what it's like realizing they'll never have grandchildren. This article was called The Unspoken Grief of Never Becoming a Grandparent. Lydia, who has 3 adult children, talked about her favorite book, The Velveteen Rabbit, and shared her sadness that she'll never get to read it to a child again. Christine, who had her daughter later in life, realized she would never pass on her family recipes or her favorite rock music. Jill wanted to make her house the fun house, where grandkids could paint, make messes, and go on adventures. She and her husband were coming to terms with the fact that their adult children have decided not to have babies. All the subjects of the article have adult children who, for various reasons, have vowed not to continue their family line. This has strained the relationship between parent and child, and according to the article, put the would-be grandparents in a stage of grief for babies they'll never hold in their arms. This is a sadness many older Americans are about to share, because for reasons we'll get into during this episode, half of those capable of having children in America are simply choosing not to. That is such a shocking number, it bears repeating. Half of all childless adults under 50 aren't having children, and the number is slowly rising. That's something that's never occurred in our history, not without a major disaster like the Black Death or a world war preventing them from having children. The article doesn't go into detail about why younger people are deciding not to have kids. Instead, it focuses on the older generations that will never experience being grandparents. And despite the sympathetic tone of the author, the New York Times article has spawned a ton of backlash online. Comments, Reddit posts, and YouTube videos have popped up, often by younger readers who have had plenty to say of why they think babies are about to become as rare as diamonds. And they don't think a childless America is on the horizon because of moral reasons. Wild Philemia, also from Reddit, posted the following. Number 1, I'm poor. Number 2, there is no guarantee that I'll be able to get help if something goes wrong. The Sarah York on X left a comment so scathing, it was republished by BuzzFeed. Boomers sit in their paid-off 4-bedroom homes in the suburbs while their kids drown in debt, and a skyrocketed cost of living, watching winter rapidly disappear. But what about what we want? One comment that has since been removed from the article simply said, boomers are perpetually trying to eat from a garden they didn't tend. Our next 2 episodes will cover 2 big, scary topics that threaten both the identity of our nation and the existential fears of older citizens. Today's episode 1, will cover the New York Times article and the forever empty nester generation that just realized how few babies will be born in the next 20 years. We will try our best to debunk the myth that the boomer generation, who currently holds all political keys and sits in the seats of power, designed an economy that will make it impossible to raise children. Then in our next episode, we'll put our accountant hats on and attempt to find real-world solutions for half of the young adults who are finding it impossible to start families on their own. But before we get to our myths, I want to ask Joe about the sarcastic, one-off joke that sent our toboggan of a podcast down the slippery slope.
This episode kind of got going because of a dumb joke that we told. And it was because I was telling you first. I was telling you about parent friends of ours. Rachel and I have started like making friends who are also married. So we've already got like couples friends that we talk to, almost every night because we play video games together and stuff. And we've been asking them, the ones that have kids, what's it look like when you go to a PTA meeting? Like what's it look like when you go to a talent show or something? And is it, does it seem like it's like there's less kids? Because there are, like, statistically there's less kids. We're going to get into the current replacement rate and like how it looks nationally and how other developmental countries are trying to cope with not having as many babies. And he said something that I will never forget. He was like, "Oh yeah, no, all of the parents are the oldest people you could imagine. They all look like they drank from the wrong chalice in Indiana Jones," which is a very, very crude way of saying that most of the parents that he sees are old. They're in the 40 to 60 age
Yeah.
bracket, because that's the only age where you can start affording kids nowadays.
They look like grandparents.
They look, yeah, they're first time parents and they look like grandparents. And then that next day I told you about it. And then on the mic while we were recording, I said that I made the joke of like, oh, like rappers wear gold chains as a flex for like how much money they have. The real flex, honestly, isn't gold chains now. It's having a baby on your hip while you're at a party. Like that's money.
I do remember that. Yeah.
So I was going to ask you about this article. We don't often base an entire episode around an article and trying to debunk it and looking at it from all sides and trying to rationalize it and sympathize with the people it's talking about. But the article was so compelling and it spawned so much backlash. Like I've not read many New York Times articles where it gets roasted so hard on YouTube, Reddit. It's spilled over in other platforms. So yeah, I was wondering if we want to talk about today's grandparents that will never actually be grandparents.
Well, I had an experience this week where I met my niece for the first time. Now, I was raised by a mother who had the sex ed. She had me very young. She had me when she was 19. And so she was a single mom. Not right away, but she became a single mom pretty soon. And she had problems with her family. The olden days, this would have been the 70s, the family disowned her. So she kind of got a little bit scarred about having kids will ruin your life. And I felt like I was brainwashed from a very young age.
Yeah.
You can't have kids. You can't have, you're dating a person. If you get her pregnant, you're going to be, it was on and on and on. So she had 4 adult children. She doesn't have any grandchildren. She's been bawling about it.
So she's in this camp.
Oh, hysterically. But she just got her youngest, who's only 22, finally had one. That was her last chance. She was running out of time, daylight. And I got to meet this niece of mine for the first time. Joe, it was an amazing experience. I was immediately in love. I have baby fever now. I want one. And I think the reason I'm bringing up this story is Joe and I both like kids a lot.
Yeah.
But if you don't have them, like when someone doesn't have a pet, what do you think? They probably don't like pets, right? Am I speaking for you here?
Oh no, you're dead on. I've gotten a lot of people who think that I don't like kids because I don't have them. And I turned 40 last year. And when you hit 40 and you don't have children, people make assumptions. But I think it's mostly older people. Like everybody who is my age or had perpetual roommates through their 30s.
Point.
Yeah, they know it's because you're poor. They know it's because you didn't get paid enough. And the funny part is, I worked a union job. I've saved for my 401k. Like I made smart decisions for my tax bracket. I didn't make nearly enough money. That was the sin that I made, was my parents didn't send me to any college and like I didn't get a proper education. I had grants for about a year, but it wasn't enough to like, fully get into a trade. I chose a trade. I chose a security business and I was upwardly mobile. I got better and better jobs every couple of years until I eventually got my private investigator's license. Like I did well and I tried to upskill myself as much as possible. And in the end, it wasn't enough to have kids. Like we will, in the second half of this episode, we're going to get down to the actual money it takes, because the question we want to ask in this episode really is, there's a fallacy that youngsters and people my age and younger, they just aren't willing to do the hard work, that they're morally not there. They're so morally bankrupt and they're so self-obsessed. They're the selfie generations that won't put down their phone and they won't stop buying avocado toast and they won't stop thinking about themselves. And if they really wanted it, they could have kids and they would just work harder and they would get 2 or 3 jobs like their grandparents did during World War II. And we want to talk about the actual numbers. Like we don't want to say no. We don't want to say that's bullshit, because sometimes it is. Sometimes people don't have the morals for it, or the temperament, or sometimes people are too selfish. But we want to actually take the national averages, take the best numbers we can, apply them, and say this is what it actually takes money wise, dollar for dollar, to have a kid these days, and why it is more of a flex than having a gold chain around your neck.
Anybody who doesn't like pets or kids, and I'll give them one or the other, but if they don't like both, that is a terrible person to have cut out of your life.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, I don't care how beautiful they are, or smart they are, or funny they are. There's something wrong with them.
Yeah, you're allowed to dislike pets if you're allergic. You're allowed to dislike children if you had a terrible experience as like a stepfather or something. But you're not allowed both.
Not a kitten, a puppy, or a baby. You can't hate all those three. That's impossible.
Right. So our myths, the ones we really want to talk about, if you're okay with it, because we usually do this show by saying, here's our myths right up top. We wanted to start this one a little bit different because we don't want to get into harsh blaming territory, because that's what this article got into. The article we're talking about, it very instantly became younger people blaming the older generation for designing a system where they can't win and they can't have kids. And it's everything the older generation wants. So why, how could they claim older people, these cruel younger Redditors and YouTubers, how could they possibly claim that the old generation doesn't want to see grandkids around? It's all they want. Like there's a funny Saturday Night Live skit where like these old grandmothers are sitting there on a stool, and every time they're asked by the Hallmark Channel or whatever, like, what do you want for Christmas? And they're like, grandchildren. and that's where we're at, is like, how could you possibly say that the older generation didn't build a child-friendly world when it's all they want now? So we want to kind of like demystify that a bit. What happened, when it comes to taxes? What happened when it comes to policy and politics? What happened to make a world where it's so difficult to have kids?
It's so funny because my mother said that about, she's dating online, and she was saying that when you're dating online in your 60s and 70s, it's status and how many grandchildren you have.
Yeah.
like that's, if you have 15, you're just seen as this, real man. what a woman, this strong family roots, right?
Right.
And it's funny when I see, because in my business, I go and I call on homeowners to sell construction services, and when I see those grandchildren with their grandparents, it isn't like they just want to have them just to get pictures of them. They want to see them every day. They want to watch them. So when you have that support system, you couldn't pry those kids away from those grandparents would pay money to have those kids, but not everybody has that home life situation.
Yeah. And that's going to be one of the myths we bust in this episode or the next. One of this gets political real fast, and I wish it didn't. I'm tired of having every one of our episodes dip into politics, but it has to happen because that's what the Republican Party ran on this cycle, is this presidential cycle. J.D. Vance specifically went out and campaigned for Trump on the platform of, we've got solutions to childcare. We've got solutions to the expenses involved in children. We've got solutions for how we can start having kids again. And the solutions he kept mentioning were grandparents. Every one of his solutions usually basically boiled down to the older generation will take care of it. Don't worry about it, youngsters. Just have kids, and have grandma be a nanny. So we're going to talk a bit about that in this episode and next, where, is that something that is possible, where, do enough of us have our grandparents around still living where they can take care of kids? Are they, do the numbers support that? Or do we need, daycares? Is school and daycares a necessary thing? ? And that shouldn't be a question, but it is now. And the thing we want to talk about in this episode near the end is, what is that world going to look like when we don't reach replacement rate? That's already happened. I won't spoil the number yet. We have far dipped below replacement rate. And in case you don't know what that term means, it means that, for the history of America, everybody who has a family, like you have two couples get together, or you have two people get together, form a couple, and they have 2.3 kids. Like there's the old joke of, I want to move to the suburbs with you and have 2.3 kids if you're being romantic and hitting on somebody like a nerd. Um, that used to be America's replacement rate, which is, you quote unquote replace the parent. You replace the father and mother with hopefully a son and a daughter, and then a 0.3 child, meaning you have possibly a third kid, and that means that we grow. That's really what it's all about, is replacement rate. Insert that name for we grow as a nation. Is do we replace the people that are slowly passing away? The elderly we lose every year. Do we have enough kids to replace them? The answer for America at this moment is no, and the rate is going to kind of take your breath away. And we'll talk about that and what that means, and why it's hit such a astronomical low this year, and why it's continuing to go down year by year. But first, we want to get to our absolute biggest myth, and possibly the one that both sides of this article may be missing, which is it true that younger people are too selfish to have kids nowadays? Are they just not willing to do the work, basically?
I have to ask you this question. I didn't know where to litter this into the episode. I just want to know what you think. I read this article about how young men treat their girlfriends, and how they learn. And the myth is that they learn from their parents. They see how their dad or their stepdad treats their mom, and that's how they treat someone they like. There's 0% of that. And I think back to when I was a kid, I didn't associate those older relationships with relationships. I saw them as old people, and I learned from peer pressure. I learned from what I saw, how I saw my friends treat girls, or some of the guys who I thought were good with meeting women or young women and dating, and how they acted, their behavior, and then from my own rejection. Now, do you think that this is fueling a peer pressure where something's wrong with you if you have kids, or you just don't feel like you want to take the leap? But if you see that everyone else is, you're going to have that keeping up with the Jones effect. So, you see what I'm saying?
That's a good question. Yeah.
So it snowballs good or bad, and we're snowballing the wrong way right now.
Okay. So part one of that question is, are young men doing something wrong in their relationships to where it's not bearing children? Like they're not treating women properly, or
No, not at all. No,
okay.
Once they're already in an established relationship, but what I'm saying is, in the first part, what I'm trying to say is it's peer pressure that drives it.
Okay.
So when your peers aren't doing something, like you said, everyone wants to get, that used to be in the boomer generation, you get married, you get a house, you get 2.2 kids in the suburbs, right? But then when nobody's doing that, and then when you do it, is something wrong with you? You know what I mean? Because none of us, we're, even in our 20s and 30s, we're still young people,
Yeah. I'm gonna kind of turn that back with first a short story and then a question. I have had the experience where, I grew up in a poorer neighborhood with people who didn't make as much income. I ended up splitting a duplex side with, a couple of roommates, just guys that I knew that from school and from college. And we had what most millennials have done to survive, which is you have multiple people per house, you have multiple roommates, you're stacked together like logs, and you all pay rent, and that's how you survive in the city. And we had the experience of we kind of quietly, and sometimes not so quietly, we talked about it sometimes. We talked about how our chances of having kids were nil or very low because we would never make enough income to do it. And we dated, but we also dated with the knowledge of like the amount of money it would take to get married was prohibitive.
And I know all these people he's speaking of, and they're all smart and educated and hardworking. Yes. They're not a lazy one of you bunch.
No, they're all outgoing. You've met them. They work 60-hour weeks. They try very hard. They live in a part of the city where the expense is so high that that I say this in past tense. Two of them have now bought their own house. They basically turned roommate into permanent roommates slash investors together, and they now have a house together, and they're going to like rent out parts of it. So financially, we're still trying to make smart decisions, and they got in right before the rates change and things. So like we're doing very well, but there was at our younger stage just a deep depressing knowledge that like kids were off the table. Like we didn't talk about it, not because of peer pressure, but simply because it would make each other sad. um and this is an experience I have spoken to about with women friends of mine who they express the same thing, but a lot of their directed thinking is, well, I would need a rich man to do, part of the heavy lifting with me, like in a relationship. So like they're more directed at like almost like a what do you call it? Almost like Pride and Prejudice. Like their thinking is more of, well, there's too many peasants around. I will have to find a landowner to marry if I ever want to have kids. Men's thinking is, oh God, I'll never have kids because my income is just simply too low. And this comes from people like I said, we had solid jobs at this point, and we had union jobs, and like we had 401k. So like we had things set up pretty well, and still we knew that it probably wouldn't happen. um Peer pressure maybe. I don't remember anybody specifically in that age bracket saying don't have kids, or what are you doing, like you're gonna get on the hook for what if you get that girl pregnant, it'll be a disaster, you'll be ruined. I do remember having talks, especially like I think Kanye had a song come out specifically about paying child support forever. That was the That's the only peer pressure I remember about that.
I don't think it's peer pressure as much as it's just staying with your and like you said, you just give up on it. You just close that door and say, I just don't, it's not going to happen for all those things to line up,
But now that
you feel inferior, right? You feel like I wouldn't be able to provide for either one of them, or, so it's tough.
No, that's exactly right. And that, there's now politicians and economists. Like I saw Scott Galloway, who is like a moderate from, like, he's a professor at New York Stern. We talk about him sometimes. He on his podcast talks a lot about like the inferiority complex young men are getting, knowing that they're just not going to ever stack up enough to have a family. So it's, I think a lot of the economy problem and the problem we've talked about in the past when we talk about young male shooters and stuff, it's like, well, there's a hopeless component to it. And now that I'm in my 40s or just now reaching 40, I find that peer pressure is reversed. My friends who have kids are jokingly telling us, they're being very sweet about it, and they're being very funny about it, but they are saying like, when are you guys going to have kids? It's time. So, and I recognize obviously the grandparents want kids too, or the parents want grandkids. So yeah, there's peer pressure now in reverse, which is very funny. And because I can sort of like zoom out and see my own situation from a third person perspective, I think it's very funny too.
Let's talk about the myth that so we go to any neighborhood right now. What's wrong with these young people? What are you going to hear from every older person over for? What are they going to say about this generation of workers, Joe?
Lazy.
They're lazy. They're entitled. Nowadays, you can't find anybody that wants to work. We heard it during COVID, didn't we? Yeah. Nobody in this country wants to work. Now, this struck a nerve with me because I have a construction business and I hire brick masons. And the good ones are young. They're tough. They're hardworking. I also go to Toastmasters, where young college grads with all these degrees who work themselves to the bone 70 hours as, as project managers or whatever. I'm like, I don't think that's true. So there's this article, and it says, it's from How Stuff Works, and the writer's Dave Roos. It's a really good article, and we're gonna have links to it in this in our show notes. But the title of it is "Nope, Boomers and Xers don't work harder than Millennials." So what they said, and I've always thought this, I didn't think lazy was something we just invented lately. I remember lazy people in the 80s and 90s.
They didn't exist before then.
I think they were even lazier back then because there was no cell phones or emails to micromanage people. But the gist of the article is this is what they're saying is it has less to do with when somebody was born. There's absolutely no connection with Gen X or millennials or this. What it comes down to is somebody's driver's license, how old they are, and how experienced they are. So when you get someone who has experience, no matter when they were born, they are going to complete tasks better. They're going to see things through more. So it's not a matter of if you're born in this time, because isn't that what we think? Yeah, that Depression generation.
It's the generation.
Yeah, they were just so tough. Well, people are people.
That might actually be the name of the episode if it wasn't so subtle. Is people are people. There's something I've talked about on the show before. The graffiti of ancient Rome. I won't repeat any of the phrases that they have on their website, but it's a site where like they've gone back and looked at the walls of Pompeii and the graffiti that people wrote and the message they wrote to each other. And you read it and you laugh because it's like it's filthy and it's funny and it's goofy and it's stupid. And there's even like almost like Yelp reviews carved into walls in Pompeii for bad hotels. And you're like, oh, we've never changed. We generation by generation, we are exactly the same as we've always been for a couple thousand years at least. And the difference is what economy you grew up in will change your opportunities. And also the age you're at will change how your work ethic and maturity is. That is something so that actually is a good question that there's a follow-up to what you said. Do you think it's just that boomers and Gen Xers are mature enough now to know how much work affects their future prosperity? They can now look back and reflect and say, oh, all the best stuff happened because I worked hard and I had that ethic.
Well, that's a deep question because a lot of it's timing, especially with the boomers. When you were in a country that was the world power and you got severance packages that don't exist anymore and benefits that don't exist anymore and pensions that don't exist and work weeks that, it used to be you could work 40 hours a week at a job for 40 years. That is impossible now. That is impossible. The same person will have 10 different careers in there and they have to keep moving or else they'll just get grinded out. And no adults in this country work 40 hours a week anymore. That's a funny thing because you used to say, oh, work-life balance. They say that now when we're working more hours than ever. Right.
Yeah.
And so everyone starts out as a punk on their job. Okay. But if you come back in 10 years when they're more experienced, that they're not punks anymore, that they're the experts.
Right. And I think that can happen to anyone. Like I used to meet young people at my job and they would be, just out of high school. They'd be starting up the path. Like they would be snotty and have a terrible work ethic. And I used to think, I'm like, you're going to be like this in 20 years. I'm going to come back and you're barely going to be a person. Like you'll be so lazy at this job. You'll barely have a pulse. But then I think about, I'm like, no, that's everybody. Like a lot of people start like that. And if they started with a good work ethic, then it only got better. Like it.
But don't we romanticize how hard workers we are, Joe? Don't we?
Absolutely.
Don't we look back and go, man, I was a tough, and we were that person. We really were. And this is the thing. I went to my wife was MC. I'm going to humbly brag here. She was the MC at the state science fair. They held it at Portland State, and it was for the whole state of Oregon. So for high school students, it was the finals, and this is a qualifier for the national science fair and it was packed. It's a big, it's where they play D1 basketball, and those kids are brilliant. And there wasn't a lazy kid in the bunch. But what I did notice was there were a low attendance of parents.
Yeah.
And I couldn't help but wondering, where else would you be if your kid was in the finals for the state fair?
They're so old they're in nursing homes.
Or they're not as hardworking as they say. And if they actually worked on those projects for their kids, they'd be there just to see how they placed. But they didn't, So
right.
You're telling me those kids aren't hard workers? This is stuff they do after school,
Yeah. The thinking of the generation below you as soft, selfish, and immoral, and that's why they haven't had kids yet. it seems like the right answer, especially if you are the older generation looking down, but you're not new if that's what you think. There are ancient Romans and ancient Greek philosophers who were saying the exact same thing. They were looking at the younger generation and saying, these bastards would never fight the Persians like we did. They're too soft to farm the steppes like we did with the sheep. Like they won't even like spin wool 12 hours a day. Like these guys are never going to make it. So the generation above looking down and saying you guys are too soft and you're you have a trophy for everything, you're not gonna, that's as old as humanity too. And you're right, I think it's perspective. It's, you get old enough, you get mature enough, you realize the mistakes the younger people are making, and you say, I never made those mistakes, I was a hard worker. I think
Yeah.
I mentioned before that my grandmother worked multiple jobs for her kids. That only lasted for like 6 months. It's short bursts where we work that hard. Nobody can do that for an extremely extended period of time, but we remember it. We say, hey, my grandparent sacrificed the shit out of her life to give us a good life. But we forget that it didn't last forever, and that they eventually found a better job, and they settled into a good rhythm.
It wasn't a 40-year
No.
lost in the desert.
Nobody works 3 jobs for their whole life.
And to push back on this, oh, you need a trophy. You shouldn't get a trophy unless you win. Well, I think every single kid at that science fair, all the hard work they did after work they deserve something, some acknowledgement. And we get acknowledgments in jobs, and we get acknowledgments in pay and stuff too, right?
Yeah.
So when they act like people, like you're just walking down the street and roses are being thrown at your feet and
right,
you're being served. This is great. You're gonna love this one. This is a Gen X mom who says she's carrying her weight for her millennial daughter. So she's 42 and her daughter's 22. But her daughter, you're gonna love this story. Her daughter has straight out said she does not want kids. And that's one thing to say that, because sometimes you change your mind, you get a little older. But the mom is pushing the button of that. This is not, it's bad karma. It's bad. We need to continue our family. Some people are real family people, and they see that as, ultimate failure. So this 22-year-old daughter, she's starting a procedure. I didn't even know this was a thing, to sterilize yourself. Did you know that? So you can't have kids?
I knew that you could do it. Like you can have your tubes tied and stuff.
Yeah. So I'm like, oh, that.
But at 20, that's crazy.
She means business at 22. Yeah. So the 42-year-old mom is so mad at her daughter, she decided to have 2 kids, 2 twins.
Oh my God.
And so she's throwing it. She says, we need this for our ancestral.
Our ancestral.
Thank you. So she says, I'm stuck birthing and raising 2 babies that should have been hers because she's too selfish. And now I'm getting teased that's his auntie, that this is actually her brother and sister, not, her kids.
Okay. Imagine being that kid. Imagine like growing up and calling your sister your aunt because they are 22 years older than you.
It's a sibling. That's what I was trying to say.
Also, are you buying the mother's thing of like, this is because my daughter didn't do her job? She wants kids. Like I think that's got to be it, right? Like the 40-something-year-old, like, or
she's baby crazy.
Yeah, she's baby crazy.
And I like this quote so a couple people online said this. Okay, that's just weird. My daughter's 42 and chose not to have children. And I never thought about making more babies to compensate. This is somebody online.
Right.
to help her to even out the score.
Why didn't she adopt? Like, why couldn't she adopt a kid?
She wants the sex is the fun part. Why are you trying to take the fun out of this whole thing?
Oh yeah, I forgot about that part. So one of our myths that we have to try to bust is our older generations to blame for not building a child-friendly world. And I kind of want to rewind through history for 2 seconds to say that there have been periods of time where We did not build economies and ruling governing systems that allowed for the common man to have kids. And what I mean by that is there are periods of history, like if you look at like the Mongols. let's go to Genghis Khan and the Mongols. There's periods of time where like Genghis Khan had the most kids of anybody throughout history. Like Patton Oswalt, the comedian, has a joke where he says he took an ancestry test and found out that he was part Khan, and then he thought it was crazy. He's like, "Oh, I didn't know I had any Asian heritage in me." And then the doctor was like, "Yeah, no, apparently just Genghis Khan had kids with everybody. He had a harem of thousands of women, and like he bred more children than anybody on earth." But that's at the expense of like the peasants, like the Mongol peasants and like some of his horde. They were not having kids because all of them went to one person, the richest person in that moment. Um, there are periods of history where the nobility in England was having way more kids than the serfs that were working the land because they just simply couldn't afford it. There are lots of periods in human history where the people having the most kids are not the peasants, they're not the workers, they're not the labor force. It is the people who can afford it. So when we read through this and say that we are building a world that is less friendly for adult people to have children, it's looking at it in a very broad historical context and saying, here are the laws that we have passed year by year. Here are the policies that have been passed year by year in America that have slowly built a system where, you know, the wealthier people can have a bunch of kids with multiple partners. They can basically have a harem if they want, like Elon Musk is trying to do.
I was just going to say his name.
You say Elon Musk. Yeah. Elon Musk is the next Genghis Khan.
Where you kind of look at your kids and your family, not to spend time with them, but kind of like a beach house. You know, you see them once in a while, you know.
Yeah.
You don't want them living with you. Ick. Not all of them. Not at the same time.
Oh my God. Okay, so a little caveat. Did you hear that Elon Musk is he's actually building like a harem house here in Texas. He's building a compound here that they're like trying to like some people are protesting it, but it's a compound for multiple of his wives and ex-girlfriends to live, where they can raise his many kids together in the same area.
I think he's just doing that for time management, so he doesn't have to fly all over the world.
I actually think you're right about that.
not for anyone's sake but his own.
Yeah. So this is something that I don't see very often online, by the way, is when people say, you know, when the New Yorker puts out an article saying that these boomers are sad because they'll never have grandkids, and then their grandkids get online and say, "Oh, well, you didn't make a world that's right for us to have kids." I don't think that it's necessarily those boomers' faults. Like, I don't think it's a generation. I don't think it is like a specific couple people that did it. I think that we just voted specifically for things that would funnel money. I mean, like the boomers just happened to have the most population, so they got to pass the most laws before they reached an age where they started dying off. And those laws happen to support them. Like it so happens to favor their retirements. It happens to favor, you know, Medicaid. It happens to favor adjustment, like living adjustment prices for the elderly and for senior citizens. It does not favor adjustments for schools and adjustments for daycare and adjustments for childcare and adjustments for the cost of having children. So it was simply, I think, giving a broad overlook of, I think while we go through these laws that got passed starting from the 60s, I think it was just a case of who did it favor? Well, it favored the people that were doing the voting in that moment. And that has, as the British economist David Lord Willett said, that's created a pinch. And that pinch is on the younger generation at the moment. So here are the numbers from the Brookings Institute, Pew Research, and the Center of Budget and Policy Priorities. We will leave links to all of this so everybody can look up our history and our policies that we're talking about and how this happened. And we're just going to go through which party was voting at that moment to cut programs, and which programs got cut, and you know why, and you know who it favored.
Can I put out something just very prime?
Oh yeah, please.
The Genghis Khan thing and all this. And it's very similar to a business. I think a community that's not growing and not getting younger is dying. That's why you build your communities. That's why you make parks. That's why you make things nicer. That's why you have libraries. That's why you have a better education system, right? It really is for the future, but it's a business decision too. I think with less, right, with less talent coming in, you look at it with colleges, with athletics, you want more to pick from. You want more of everything. Am I right? Just
Yeah. Well, I mean,
instinctively, like you don't want to just have a bunch of old people. And I see that with churches sometimes. They're dying. They're
yeah,
literally dying, and they're not being replaced with young blood.
that's the argument I'm making. Is it's the communities that we decided to improve. I mean, like, you're right. The local community, the local churches here, there's so few kids. Like, you barely see any kids, and like the schools here, yeah, it's crazy seeing less kids and less blood and less growth. But I mean, the retirement communities here and the Florida retirement communities are fucking banging. Like, they have golf carts. They have, like, they have their own private golf carts that to like go house to house nearby. They've got golf courses on the lots of these retirement communities. So the communities for people who are older and are like renting out houses in other states, those are banging. Like that's what we prioritized. Like, that's the society we chose to build. So, like, good on them, but like it's gonna come at a cost. Like, that money didn't come from nowhere. Um, but that's, I know I sound like I'm saying that tongue in cheek, but I say that more as that's what we chose. That, like, what these votes I'm about to read are, they were the choices. We made choices decade by decade. Those choices built the community we wanted, and the community we chose to want is, it favors the age 75 to 80, and that's the wealthiest generation that's ever lived. Like, it, again, like, I'm just going to read through this because it sounds like I'm slandering almost, but it really isn't. This is what we built. Um,
I think you're doing okay. You're not tipping your hand. I think you're even.
yeah.
You haven't. I'm trying to see what side you're on here, but you haven't done. I figured you're just gonna spit coming out of your mouth, rage. You've done this to yourself.
You've heard me frothing.
You're holding it together. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll go through this, and I'm only going to point out the parties that we're voting in the moment to illustrate that the party priorities have changed too since the 60s. We have flip-flopped which is the working man's party. We flip-flopped which is the elitist party. We flip-flopped which party actually supports children. So it does change year by year. That's the other thing that I really don't want to confuse people on, is everyone's like, the Republican Party is the party of children and the working man, and the Democratic Party at this moment is the party of the wealthy elite, and they get paid by pharmaceutical companies. That's this year. we've had several decades of both parties have made terrible missteps. So let's go through some of those. So we're talking about the 1960s. In the 1960s, in that decade, historically, the Democrats improved investment in children more than Republicans. They expanded Medicaid and CHIP. They did the Head Start program for early childhood education. They had the child tax credit expansion that and eventually got expanded under Biden's administration, called the American Rescue Plan. They had nutrition programs; those were called SNAP and WIC. So they had safety nets, basically. And they, when I say safety net, I think a lot of people mistake that for thinking it's only for the poor, or like it was specifically to the moms and dads were too lazy to have jobs to provide enough food and assistance for their kids, so we had to cover for it. That's not really the case. It's more of like Medicaid was in that package. Like, we don't think of Medicaid as a support or safety net. So at the same time, Republicans were more likely to focus on tax credits, or what's called indirect support, which means they advocate for reductions in spending. They tried to include programs that supported children. But again, it was more like they were trying to pass things that would overall improve the economy. We had some laws that were favoring children in the 60s, and then we shrank almost all of those at this era. So why did that happen? Well, in the 1980s, we had the Supplemental Assistance Program, the SNAP, that was cut back by the Reagan administration. The Aid to Families with Dependent Cares Act was replaced by Clinton. Child and dependent tax credits. They weren't indexed for inflation. So basically, it was like it just never got better. Like as inflation continued and as the economy grew and as we got into modern money, they did not increase the amount for the child and dependent care tax credit. So that tax credit just like stayed its old value.
So when you were in school, were you the free lunch kid or the free breakfast kid?
I think it's funny you asked that. I was going to bring that up this episode. I was a free lunch kid for a while because I came from a very poor family, and then they cut my program. And I'm about to read the moment they cut that program, and then I had to work in the lunchroom for several years. So like all throughout high school, I worked in the lunchroom.
Earn your pass like a sailor in the friggin'.
I did.
Well, I remember because I was a reduced lunch. So I wasn't, there was the kids who had to pay $2 or whatever. And then there was me, I had a red ticket. And then if you had a green ticket, you didn't pay at all. But I remember palming my ticket, being so embarrassed.
Yeah.
That, you know what I mean? And of course, the free lunch guys, they wave theirs around, or, the one, not the free one, but the ones who paid.
Right.
And then I remember feeling for the kids who had the breakfast, which was like just this little box of cereal and then a milk.
That was me.
Thinking that they were really poor. Like I'm thinking, man, they got it tough, those guys. You know what I mean? They have to come in here early and have this, and it almost looked like they're being punished for something.
Man, you are hurting my brain, bringing back core memories like that. No, that's
you know what I mean? Because you guys weren't happy. You were just it was rough, but it was tough. It looked like a prison camp kind of thing.
Okay, I want to bring you back visually to this moment. Okay, so 1996, SNAP and eligibility restrictions got put into place by Clinton, and the common sentiment of the 90s was, if you can't afford kids, stop having them. Around that time, they started cutting aid. So like before then, I would go into school and and you're right, you're dead on. You had to arrive about 30 to 40 minutes before classes started. So you're there at like 6 in the goddamn morning. It's cold and it's quiet and you want to sleep. And they would bring out the milk crates. So like the plastic milk crates with those little cartons in them. And they were cold. Like the whole crate was cold because they would just wheel the whole thing out of the freezer or the fridge. And then they would put it in line where they're like the lunch tables are all empty. And so you'd walk through the line, you'd grab your little box of cereal and you'd grab this, like you'd reach into the carton, the plastic crate, and grab a single milk carton, and you'd go sit down and eat your cereal with 7 other people in a empty lunch. The whole place is empty.
There was no ceremony. There was no production.
And you quietly ate your cereal before class started. And like you would hear kids start funneling in through the halls while you're eating, and you try not to be seen leaving the lunchroom. You knew you were poor.
It was shameful. It was just so shameful, right? Like, oh my god,
fuck, it was awful.
They don't even have cereal. That's how poor they are.
Yeah,
I genuinely felt bad for those kids. It's exactly how you describe it. It's just making me laugh because I'm laughing because I just took me right back to 1987. It's just.
Well, it doesn't get better. Like, by the way, if anybody's like, oh, but we put programs like that back into place, it's like, no, there's a reason why we talk about hungry kids and school programs today. And there's a reason why, some political parties are currently saying we're paying too much for school lunches. Why are we supplementing the laziness of parents? In 2010 to 2013, we lost our appetite to support each other. Like we started feeling the pinch. Like the housing recession happened in 2008. We all got our asses handed to us. Even if we didn't own a house, the recession after that kicked us in everywhere. Like it kicked our butts. It stood on our throats. It was awful. Everybody felt bad. Everybody felt pain. Even if you're in the upper class, like even if you had money, you felt like you had less and you felt like you were at the edge of being poor, no matter what economic bracket you were in. So we all lost our appetite for helping each other. 2010 to 2013, during the recession, the education budget declined by an average of 4% each year in real dollars. And when I say real dollars, that means adjusted. It's currently amounting to 23% reduction from its peak. So there's the question of why don't we put the states themselves in charge of managing their funding for children? that's a question that's being risen right now. Like the current party in power, the Republican Party, say, why don't we put all of these decisions into the hands of states? Um, but that's putting the same exact skew and the same exact vote into the hands of older voters, older representatives, and older corporations. It's not like the federal government says we shouldn't have school lunch programs and we shouldn't have safety net programs for impoverished children. Let's just put these programs in the hands of the states and let them dole out their own money and their own food. But our like the Congress people here in Texas, the Texas House and the Texas decision makers and the Texas governor and all this stuff, they aren't any younger than who's in Congress in DC. The representatives in Oregon aren't any younger than the people in DC. It's state by state. It's the same representative age and sample. So you handing control back to the state and saying, "Hey, you take care of your own kids. We're tired of this." You Alabama or you New York, you decide your own things for how you're going to feed and take care of your kids. That's still handing it back to basically an elderly population who is chosen to be in local government for their retirement. And they're still choosing the same thing. They're still slowly cutting programs and reducing funding for youngsters. And by the way, the data indicates that if states had maintained their pre-recession funding levels, public schools would have nearly $600 billion more in state and local revenue over this decade. And they don't. So like that difference, that vast difference shows that like we didn't just cut funding, we didn't keep up with the times, and we chose not to. In 2015, 29 states voted to provide less overall state funding per student in the 2015 year compared to 2008, before the recession took hold. In 19 states, local government funding per student also fell during this period. So what you're looking at is after the housing crash and the recession, everyone, even at the state level, state by state, lost their appetite for helping to fund education and food for children and childcare, just generally.
What was more important?
What do you mean?
Was there some cause that they said, you know what I mean? Especially because all these
what
people
were we funding?
and all these, I know these people.
Where
I
did
know
that
these
money
people
go?
are 2 point. I know all those people who are in government have children and grandchildren. I know that. The vast majority of them, right?
Yeah. If they had enough money going into the recession, they had grandkids. That's how you know who had kids in during that period. Is did they were they wealthy enough to have kids? Where did that money go?
If you can't afford them, that doesn't sound Bill Clinton-y, does it? If you can't afford them, don't have them.
No, he didn't say that. That was more what his
that was how they were acting. I mean, I know he didn't say it. He's too politically correct for that.
If you want to compare 1960s passing bills to now, and what's changed, why did we? It's not just the parties. Why are we not supporting children in this decade? The reason that I can find is because the average age of a Republican congressperson is 60 or older. The average voter for a lot of these programs is really old. The average voter is like in 2022, 78% of people who are registered to vote were 65 to 74. So when people talk about get out the young vote or get the younger people out to vote or we put out advertisements on TV to vote or die and stuff, it's really partially because older people are doing the most voting, like by a lot, by a absolute freaking landslide.
I was going to say that's in the neighborhood of it doesn't matter. You're not gonna. It's so unpopular,
Yeah,
that all the commercials and all you might get a tick up, maybe 10%. It's still going to be majority is going to be controlled by the older people.
So if 80% of boomers and Gen Xers are registered to vote, by comparison, the people in the age bracket to have kids, that would be 18 to 35. They only about so the 18 to 24 bracket, half of them are registered to vote, and the 25 to 35 bracket, 62% are registered. So like the people who would be having kids are like about half of them aren't even registered. So like, how are they going to pass bills to help themselves and help change, budget for children?
And I think that the voting parents, younger parents, are going to be of the higher social class, obviously, too.
Yeah.
So they're gonna that's not going to be as much of an open sore to them.
Right.
They're fine.
Something that Scott Galloway has pointed out, and that is pointed out in Statista, is that spending on children as a share of the federal budget has been shrinking. In 2021, it was about 11.9%, and last year it was about 7%. So it's as a share of the budget, we just aren't spending as much on kids, and I think that reflects our priorities. I think that people emotionally bemoan not having grandchildren, but then they will go and ignore new budget for schools and new budget for food for kids and new budget for daycares and things like that. They'll say, I would like to have a grandkid, my grandkid, but they won't vote for things that, make it, less expensive to have a kid. There's another sort of thought within the writing of laws and passing of laws. There's a lot of people who say, oh, well, we shouldn't be spending money on kids as a country. That should be up to the people with jobs. Like corporations should take care of kids. like you and I, Todd, we should have a corporate job, and that job should provide for our children. Like our job should be enough.
Well, we have seen that with maternity leave. In my lifetime, men didn't used to get time off for maternity leave, and that's becoming a standard. But I think it's more of to keep up with the other corporations. Right?
Maternity leave, daycares in the workplace. That's something that is new. Have you ever been to a job where they're like, okay, here's our daycare, drop your child off here if you need to?
I haven't been no. But that's, I would think that's a small percentage to have those, right? I mean, that's
some tech jobs do that. So there's the thought of okay, so we, yes, like if older generations raise their hand guiltily and say, yes, we did not vote for things that would support kids. We instead voted for things that would support us. But what about jobs? Well, corporate interests don't do that because it's expensive. Corporate lobbying generally does not prioritize investment in children unless it intersects with their industry specifically. So like private childcare or education tech and things like that, that's when a corporation will say, okay, we put out textbooks or we put out educational tools. So we will support kids because we specifically have to. Otherwise, corporations, almost without exception, try to get tax cuts and deregulation, which means that there's just less money for child programs. Childcare and family support are usually framed as costs, not investments, especially when it comes out of corporate mouths. And so, like most things, a corporation will, by and large, their responsibilities to their shareholders, and so they will do the minimum possible. And when they do put out child programs like daycares and things like that within the building, they are simply doing it to stay competitive and get the best talent. So,
and I think that's a small. I'd be curious to see what percentage.
Microfraction.
Yeah.
Oh, I tried to find a number. It was such a small amount.
I'm thinking it's Google. It's these companies that have such huge margins and are international companies. The mom and pops and national companies are not going to be able to, because they're just so expensive to staff and all the insurances and stuff. I mean, and that goes into political things too. How expensive daycares are to run. People forget about that. They talk about how much childcare it is. When I hear people talking about children and family as being a mistake, an accident, and that's fine to think that, but look at the rest of the choices we make in our life. I don't think that's a bad one. You know, we make all these other mistakes and say, oh, having a kid was the worst thing. It's like, no one's ever said that. Everyone says the kid is, even though it wasn't planned, it was the best thing that ever happened. That's the thing that gets to me too, is because everyone I know who is this die hard, I would never have children. The second they have children, Joe, they do a 180. They don't even remember that they used to say that. They are in love, you know?
Yeah.
And you have said, and you are a very cerebral, you're a studied man. What have you always said that success is? Success is what? Family and having children.
Yeah. It's there was a documentary that Simon Pegg did that was like, it's called The Pursuit of Happiness, or it may just be called Happiness. I think The Pursuit of Happiness is a Will Smith movie. The Simon Pegg documentary is like, he goes around the world looking for like, what is the key to happiness? What makes you happy in the long term? What makes people around the world happier than others? He goes to countries where happiness indexes are off the chart and everyone's just happy all the time. And it just comes down to groups of people that have solid economies and children, and the emphasis is on children. So it was really kind of like a letdown at the end of the documentary. I was like, man, I thought the root of happiness would be active in your old age and do puzzles or something like that. But it's like, no, it's kids. It's kids. So speaking of kids and finding happiness, do you want to start talking about like the current administration and what the era of children looks like at this moment, and what these programs look like?
Please.
Because what I hear people thinking or saying very frequently in like, I get into online discussion groups. I used to be part of a political debate club. I still sort of like visit those corners, and I still debate people around here. Very friendly. I'm not out there with a signboard saying debate me, bro. I like discourse, and I like talking to people. About half of my friends skew the other political direction that I do, and I love that. I love having that kind of like, let's disagree on something so I can understand your side better. The discourse I hear frequently is, we're cutting programs left and right. When I talk about here's all the money we're not spending on schools, children, and programs, the Trump administration is currently cutting Medicaid and SNAP. They're going after Medicaid and SNAP to facilitate a $4.5 trillion tax cut. I know Medicaid doesn't cover children, but like, they also are cutting the Department of Education, which has never set the priorities for lesson plans. I think there's a misunderstanding that people are like, the Department of Education set a liberal agenda that we all follow, and that's not true. What they do is they set a budget for poor kids to go to colleges and to attend schools and to get them transportation, and they set sort of the agenda for money that's going to be doled out by the federal government. There's a bunch of people in your generation, Todd, who got the Pell Grant.
What's that?
So the Pell Grant is the largest federal government program offered to undergrads. It's designed to assist students from lower income households to attend college. And that's a federal grant. Like that's a if you are poor, you can apply for it and you can get some college under you. So the idea that like, we're cutting programs that shouldn't exist, and the federal government, the Department of Education, they were just spreading a political ideology and agenda and trying to shove it down kids' throats. That's not what they did. They managed money, and they managed grants, basically, and they managed programs for poor people. So those subsidies and those grants and systems are going away. They're not being replaced. Like I said, when you hand things back to states, the states are still just voting in what their current representatives are voting in, which is, again, they're in the upper age brackets, and they want better retirements. And the notion that these subsidy programs shouldn't exist in the first place, that every child should be raised by two working parents who can give them all the abundance they need, that they can provide housing and education, and the stability of a hardworking family. I'm going to ask you, Todd, just give me a guess. How many couples do you know? Actually, no. How many just people do you know fit the qualification of they make enough to reach the non-poverty mark in their city? And so like, they're able to afford the median price of a home.
I know where you're going with this. Yeah, go ahead.
And they could potentially be the age to have a kid. Like, that's it. We're the only bars we want to clear.
It almost reminds me of like sports betting, where they give you the spread, where they know exactly where you can't win. Like, it's so, and if you are on that line, you're like 1 month away from being bankrupt and homeless. You know, if you lost your job or sprained your ankle, you'd be homeless. It's that close. I mean, it's just so tight with what you're saying.
Right. We're going to assume that the current party in power, JD Vance and the Republican Party, is correct. We're just going to, for this thought experiment, we're going to say they're right. there shouldn't be any support programs whatsoever. There should not be any support for poor kids. There shouldn't be any support for hungry kids. There should not be any support for childcare, like daycares and things like that. Let's just say hypothetically, all the support comes from the parent, and parents are making the best decisions. They're being 100% smart. They're not making any financial mistakes. Let's say that, yes, we live in that amazing society. To qualify for this, you would need 2 adults in a committed relationship, working and above the median home price, so they can afford a home. That is only 18% of the population right now. So no, we're not saying like they have to be good parents, they have to be mature, they have to be smart, they have to, blah 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 blah. They have to be ready to be parents. They have to be all the things that older generations are accusing younger generations of right now, which is they're too selfish and things like that. Let's just wipe all that off the table. The only question we're asking is
economics, just the cost wise.
Yeah. How many couples are in a committed relationship and they can afford a median price of a house, so they could afford hypothetically a kid, and that's only 18%.
Easy to find a partner to begin with.
Yeah,
that it feels the same way about you, who's at the same place in their life. That isn't easy. So to even get to that 18%,
right?
I see that couple who went to University of Texas at Austin, who are both engineers, who are just super, and have had some family support, and are not. Neither one of them has gone on, or like you said, made any mistakes. Just you have to be perfect.
Well, let's just illustrate the what we think of as the American family. Let's say the father works in tech or factory or industry, or is a farmer or whatever, and the mother is like a school teacher or a librarian or a classically feminine job. Let's just say in the American ideal of, we have the ideal family, and the ideal family doesn't require any financial assistance whatsoever, because they can afford the median price of a house, and they can afford where they live, and they both have good jobs. Not great. They don't have to be engineers. That's only 18% of the population that even fits that qualification, not even talking about their mindset or their morals. And right now, like we started this episode by saying, less than half of adults of child-rearing age are having children. Less than half. So if we narrow that to JD Vance's view of, we have to have qualified families where both parents are working and they're above median income and blah blah blah. If we say it has to be this perfect ideal family that has kids, less than 18% of people having children means that our economy and our society collapses. That few of children is, and that's what we're going toward. Like, that's what we're sliding toward. Like,
but you
could see
it. You could see it going towards, for the median prices in California is over $800, almost $900,000 in the whole country, which that gets very, a lot of rural areas where there is less opportunity for income too, which is important to remember. It's around 500,000. But if you take into the people that can afford that, with the education they need to have the income to afford it, if they do have student debt, which they will, it just doesn't pencil.
Yeah.
And it's going to get worse, because the other generation, what they paid for their house was actually a year worth of salary. Well, people don't make $600,000 a year. I mean, that's what a house costs. And so it's that much, it's that unexpensive. And they say, well, interest rates are high. It's like the cost of the house is the cost of a car, comparably to today,
Yeah. I remember people doing the math for certain cities and saying it takes a decade just for the down payment at the minimum. Like not at the minimum. It takes a decade for the down payment for a minimum down payment if you save up. So yeah, we're making it impossible. So the claim that these specific boomers may have made it impossible to have children, I don't think that's the case. And I'll kind of like summarize why. And I don't think it's a party problem either. Like, let's think about that. Conservatives claim that childcare and affordable lunches, like What Kept Me Alive, and cheap housing are anti-family. Like, if you subsidize housing, affordable lunches, and childcare, that is anti-family, anti-American values, because they're socialist, they're communist values. On the same token, liberals accuse conservatives of being morally bankrupt, like they're out to force poor families into having kids. Meanwhile, liberals' cities have the worst rates for housing equality. Those are the cities where you get the most, insider trading within the parties and the so and of course we've covered that JD Vance, the vice president, says that grandparents and neighbors will raise your kids while you're away at work, and that two-parent households with adequate incomes should have kids, and those are only, again, 18% of us. So if you think about it, and we read through the major votes that were passed that made childcare so goddamn expensive to have, it's not strictly conservatives or liberals or a set of boomers who made it so hard. It's a slow bipartisan effort to chip away at any money going toward children. While meanwhile, according to Scott Galloway, the New York Stern professor, during that same period of time, there were unprecedented votes made across the board to increase the funding, quality of life, and finances of Americans over the age of 60. So that this this wasn't like I said, this isn't one small group or one party. This was everyone decided to shift things upward, and the wealth got funneled upward, and it's not leaving. We're going toward Elon Musk as the next Genghis Khan as far as like who can have kids. And if this trend continues, and it absolutely will, because the elderly are in control of state Congress and most Senate state seats, how will that world look? How will they get repopulated if this is the country we want?
Well, take the economics. I think the standard will change too, right? Where people who want to have big, we call it the big Catholic family, those will get to 2, right? And then the one, it'll be 0.6 children in every household.
Yeah,
not a full child.
I'm gonna pull the reveal now, because we've been talking all this time about how bad it's gotten as far as replacement rate goes. We're gonna reveal it. It's the current replacement rate is 1.6 according to our polls last year. It used to be 2.3. That's the joke number that everybody remembers from like the 90s and 80s and stuff, where it says, I'll move to the suburbs, have a picket fence, and 2.3 kids. That used to be our mark for that is a healthy replacement rate. That is what it looks like when America is slowly growing at a good pace that we can keep up with, and at a pace that we can build houses, and at a pace that we can replace our grandparents with, name our grandchildren after them. Here's little Joseph. He'll carry the family name. We're at 1.6, which means that you'll have a kid, and roll the dice, you might have a second kid about half the time. That's not enough for growth. And a country that doesn't grow very quickly starts struggling. It very quickly faces economic issues, very quickly realizes it can't support the industries it's built. Do you want to talk about how immigration has changed this year and why it's affecting our population growth?
This is very interesting. This is an NBC News article about immigration. The U.S. population growth in 2022 and 2023 happened because of immigration, not births. And that's the first time that's happened since 1850. And so a migration think tank came up with these statistics. The U.S. birth rates reached a historically low, falling 2% from the previous year. Falling. And fertility rate fell to 54.5 births per 1,000 females aging 14 to 44, down from 56%. So like what you said, this is the one that really got me, though. This one just floored me. 3 states, Mississippi, Vermont, and West Virginia, lost population this year. So it went from, and it
shrank.
It went, and the range was from 127 to 500. But even so, that's like against all, the world is a bigger place. It is,
Yeah.
It's like, what's going on?
In the 80s
those
and
are
90s,
3 states that I've been to and are all beautiful, Mississippi, the ugliest of the 3 of them, but overall, it's got some nice parts,
And compare that to periods where we thought we were going to have too many people in this period, and now we have
that's a good
several
point.
states that are
Yeah,
shrinking.
I remember that in the 90s, that would be a big thing where they said, we're just not going to have room for people.
So if we had about 1.6 replacement rate this year, or had slightly better the last couple of years, that last 0.4 that we needed, that came from immigration.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so that without immigration, it's a lot worse, obviously. And I'll let you cover the abortion and the replacement rate, if you would.
Okay. This came from a question when I first started pitching this episode as an idea. Todd asked a very, very smart question, which is, will they just ban abortion? Roe v. Wade was clawed back, and they're currently here in Texas. They have started going after doctors who not just who perform abortion, but who advise them, or who direct people to online sources where they can get like the pill. Without taking sides for or against choice. Again, I'm speaking on this neutrally because I just want to look at the numbers. We could have episodes where we delve politically into what is, what statistically has been best for the nation decade by decade, if we ever want to do that. I don't want to, just because it's such a sticky political issue. But if we just look at it from whether or not birth rates have been affected by removing abortions, expert estimates that about half of pregnancies currently are unintended. So limits to abortion should make more births happen. It should start making the population boom, but that's not what we're seeing. So the thought was, and by the way, this source that we're reporting from, I wanted to get from a right-wing source.
How is that
possible? Just so it didn't feel like we were being biased. This is from Fox News, and they I checked their sources, and we've also got they got this from Columbia University, and then I went and checked some population data from polling sites. So yeah, so far removing abortions has not really been affecting the population. And you asked how that happened. It's because the U.S. teen birth rates have been falling for decades, and the decline has been less dramatic in recent years, but the drop seems to have stopped. So like we
that's bizarre to me. So teenagers don't like to have sex anymore. I mean, what is happening to the world?
Teenagers are too depressed to have sex anymore.
Do you know what I mean, though? How is this possible when everyone's showing off on TikTok and all this? It's not driving any, which used to be a real problem, keeping teenagers from having unsafe sex all the time.
Yeah. The same doctor from Columbia University asked the same question. He said it could be Dobbs, or it could be related to changes in sex education, access to contraceptives where they don't feel confident enough to have sex because they don't think they could prevent a birth. But whatever the case, the birth rates are flattening for high school students. So like when everyone knew this, like, okay, so I think both parties quietly knew that by removing abortions, the people that would be having the most kids are the poor and the young. That it would be forcing or getting teenagers pregnant, and it would be getting younger people who weren't ready to have kids and didn't have much money. They would be getting pregnant. That was the gamble we rolled the dice on by removing Roe v. Wade. It's not working. So far, it is not working. Ask me again next year, I'll look up the stats again, and it may change. But right now, teen pregnancies are flattened. They went down from the 90s till now to record low rates, and they have not picked back up. They're not shooting upward like we assumed they would be. Basically what I'm seeing, and this is my take, this is opinion, and I want to state it as opinion. We're trying everything but fixing the economy. Like we're doing everything we can to get birth rates higher without bringing in migrants, and we're trying everything we can to make birth rates higher without making it affordable. We don't want to subsidize childcare. We don't want to subsidize housing. We don't want to make it cheaper for housing. We don't even want to build cheap housing. Like let's put it that way. We don't want to fight corporations because they're too powerful and it would take too many votes and too much agreement, and it would be we'd have to figure out which Congress people and which politicians are getting so much money from corporations that are like making sure that they don't, go against them. We're basically making it to where we don't want to fix the economy to make it easier to have kids, but we will do everything around that to try to make it harder to not have kids. Like the few people that are of childbearing age, we're trying to force them at gunpoint, almost literally in some places, to have kids, and it's still not working. Like you can't take somebody who is growing up in poverty right now, and you can't take somebody who has no economic future and will never make enough money to have kids. You cannot put a gun to their head and say, have kids for the sake of our nation, or else. They still won't, because they know that their life will be over when they do. If they have kids, they'll be economically ruined forever, because there's no safety nets for those kids once they're born. I laughably, I was reading an article that, and we're going to link to it, that was in the defense of boomers, and not just boomers, but like, I keep saying boomers. I don't actually believe in generational gaps, by the way. I think it's an arbitrary number just set by people. But a lot of these articles, and the one we're going to link to, talks about employers and like the child dependent care tax credit and the FSA, and they try to point a lot to, it's not the fault of the older generations, it's corporations for not supporting kids and parents as much. But laughably, one of those articles ends with the sentence, quote, ironically, combating the cost of childcare could come down to just getting grandparents to pitch in. So these very well written, well structured, thoughtful articles about where to get support for your kid from a corporation, ultimately they have the same solution that JD Vance weekly kind of like eked out, which is just please maybe get your grandparents to help. And that the flaw in that argument too is that, like, my grandparents are passed away, all of them. I don't know if you know that, Todd, but like on both sides, they just don't exist. They died for American reasons: diabetes for two of them, cancer for one of them, and then death by despair for another. So I know a lot of friends who have similar situations where their grandparents would not be in a position or mentally would not be able to help them. And again, that's not odd. Like we're talking about a slim, narrow amount of people that would even have the money and have two stable people in a house that could do it.
This has me thinking of strategy. Okay, and this is something that I've never thought of that. I've always thought about getting along with the in-laws, but I never thought about what kind of, like with my wife, her parents were not cut out. They're immigrants. They wouldn't be cut out to raise a child in this country, or they wouldn't be able to help. They don't have the money. We can't afford to support them. We can't afford to have them live with us. In your situation, you have a family that would welcome that, would probably pay you money to do it, but you probably didn't think of that when you were courting, or right? That's a great thing. That's
no. Well,
that's a life value to have that. It's hard to put a price on that.
Okay, I want to talk about that just for a second. That has been such a strange experience, because I went from living in the city in the north, where we all knew that we wouldn't be able to afford kids, and most of our parents and grandparents were gone because they, for economic and poverty reasons, they just weren't there. They had passed, died, or left. And now I'm living in a city where there are so many families that have been here forever. Like, it's a small community, very tight knit. All the families know each other. There's lots and lots of them around, and they don't have kids around here. Todd, I don't know if you know this, but like, well, okay, when you came to our wedding, there were 2 children out of 100 guests.
You know what?
One of them was a teenager, and one of them was an actual toddler, and everybody treated that toddler like he was a goddamn like idol, like the golden idol that Indiana Jones is going after.
But shouldn't there have been 30 or more?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there weren't, and it was set up for kids, and they surely would have been welcomed. But yes. It was like, we have to. That's a good point. I never thought of that.
Their family just mourned the aging of the youngest kid on that side of the family. So like that toddler was from a cousin. Um, from the side of the family that lives here, they're I'm not going to say the last name, but their cluster of kin. The last quote unquote baby turned 18 last year, and we had our last like children's Christmas together. They used to have like a Christmas gathering where everybody would come together. Everybody goes to each other's houses for dinners and stuff during Christmas time to catch up and be friendly. But they would have a group Christmas for the children where they unwrapped Santa's presents. This was the last year they've done that because the youngest was 18 and graduated high school.
But
So everybody sort of
yeah,
like
and I
the
can't.
the
This
the
is rural.
90-year-old grandparents hung their head and realized that this was the last time they're going to see grandchildren.
But that's the thing. This is rural Texas, where what do you think? You think of the 15 kids and rapping everywhere, the old video camera rap. You know what I mean? It's like
I think
this
of
would be the
Cletus from
last
The
place you would
Simpsons.
see this. This would be like towards the end of it, right? This would be the last
Yeah.
place that this would be a problem. But it's very visible. It sounds like.
When you came to the wedding, it was just like that one very young child and then one younger teenager, and that was it. And they weren't even from here. That was our guest from Mississippi who had the younger teenager. So it was really literally just the one
We had to
toddler.
fly in celebrity children.
Exactly. Yeah. The I think the best defense, and I want to kind of leave this with the defense of the older generation. All these people who are going after boomers and who are going after the New Yorker and saying that, boomers are trying to eat from a garden they didn't tend. And, maybe if you guys had built a better economy, we wouldn't be absolutely losing, we wouldn't be swimming in an ocean of no children and going to empty PTA meetings without kids. The answer to that the Guardian had was pretty damn good. They said maybe it's not the older generation, maybe it's the older upper class wealthy generation who have siphoned off the money from everyone else. It's just that birth rates are highly visible as a problem. And I'm going to read this quote from Nick Moss from he was commenting in the Guardian. He's from London. They're having the same problem over there. So like he mentions Margaret Thatcher in his quote because she was the Republican Party leader there. Nick Moss says, quote, "Not all older people have unearned asset wealth. The generation of working class people thrown on the dole by Margaret Thatcher have no such assets. Neither do their children. If you grow up in poverty, you will stay in poverty. The key factor is not age, but class. The idea of a social contract wherein each generation is better off than the last assumes that the class interests of most powerful do not mitigate against this. The redistribution of wealth from poor to rich over the decades since the 1970s suggests otherwise." So
Finally, you said social class. I brought it up like 12
thank
times.
you.
I brought it
No.
up like 12 times, and you
were waiting for me to take the
bait. You didn't flinch. It was like a poker player.
Well, no, but I did mention Genghis Khan and Elon Musk. Like I when I talk about social class, what it is we're making a system where the older generations are not necessarily to blame. We had an episode about a housing update recently, last year, where we talked about how boomers were the generation that was going homeless the quickest. They were running out of retirement money. They were selling their houses and then not being able to buy a second smaller house because there just aren't any on the market. They were spending through what they could get out of like government programs. And so boomers are an extraordinarily vulnerable generation right now because they're going homeless so fast. So it's not all of them living at a Florida golf course resort in their retirement. They're also the generation going poor very, very quickly. And I think Nick is right. I think it's largely a problem of rich people taking two opportunities away for every one that they dangle in front of employees. But here in America, we strategically and publicly voted to remove money from education, childcare, and housing. And that was done by older voters who wanted tax breaks. And because as a voting bloc, they were more scared of not having enough money going into retirement than they were scared of not having grandchildren. And they made that choice, which also happens to align with what rich people wanted to vote for, too. So those quotes we read, that's just, we would rather be secure in what happens tomorrow and think about what happens if we don't have children in this country, years from now. Regardless of who's to blame, You, Todd, mentioned that the birth rates are currently roughly around 12 per thousand people. I just looked this up for fun because I couldn't end on such a very dreary note. The rates. Okay, so we're going to talk about what does 12 and 1,000 look like. So when you hear statistics, like it's not like being struck by lightning. That's several in a million or something like that.
But 12 and 1,000 is
wild.
Yeah, that's a high school, and yeah, that's not much. There's not many.
Yeah. Okay. So for context, 12 and 1,000. If birth rates are 12 and 1,000 per year, for context, if you're of childbearing age, the odds of being burglarized in the U.S. are actually about the same as you reproducing and having a child. That's 12 and 1,000.
Wow.
The odds of incurring financial loss during a climate disaster are slightly higher right now than the odds of you having a kid in a year.
So you're more like, isn't that funny? Or isn't that scary? I guess I should say.
Your chances of being audited by the IRS every year is higher by far than the odds of you having a kid. The odds of being billed way too much by a hospital is 800 per thousand, which is much higher than 12 and 1,000. Yeah. In short, the system is designed to put would-be parents in the red year by year. Like every year, there is something in place designed to try to get that out of you, and those odds are higher than you having a child.
I think the thing about this is the positive would be if you do it now, because this is your last chance. It's going to get worse, right? Kind of like if you think houses are going to get cheaper, but they're not.
Yeah,
you better just bite it off now and sink or swim. Don't wait.
Right. Well, actually, that is going to be our next episode. So if anybody sticks around for the next episode, we're going to talk about if you sit down, pen and paper, like Rachel and I had to do, what is the actual number cost of having a kid today? What can you expect? What is the adjustment for inflation? What are people facing right now? What are the extreme difficulties of having a child? So if you're thinking this whole episode has been a couple of people whine about, the system that exists that is almost built against children, we're actually going to talk about what that looks like when you are on the ground and say, I want to be like my grandparents. Say I roll up my sleeves and I say, fuck it. I'm a hard worker. I will work 3 jobs to support a kid. I don't care. I will be like my grandparents. I will be like the silent generation. I will toughen the fuck up. We're going to talk about what that looks like in the next episode, and it's not what you think.
It's a teaser, right?
Yeah, that's a teaser.
That's a clickbait right there.
But to last thought for this episode, to remove some of the blame and some of the shame on the boomer generation, the system that was designed puts parents in the red. And if you're an older listener, you may not have voted for consistent tax cuts that ate into education and childcare and child food. You may not have greenlit the companies that made housing impossibly expensive. You may not have been the one that chose a childless future for this company, but your representatives absolutely did.
You've been listening to The Re-Engineered You. Thank you so much for listening to the show. You mean the world to us. We have a new episode every week.
You can connect with us at www.re-engineeredyou.com. That's where we have research links, show notes, feedback, and blog articles for each of our episodes.
We're not experts in anything, but we've got an opinion on everything.